Boom! I think we're streaming.
All right, well, let's assume we are. It's coming up on my end. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Little later than normal due to technical difficulty. Not unheard of from us, though, Ben, of course. This is kind of a staple of ours at this point. But anyway, tonight we're on episode 264. And I want to talk a little bit about the myths of the woods. And a quick backstory to this. I've had this in my back pocket, I don't know, for a couple of weeks now, Ben, something like that.
Yep.
So in any case, in the last year, maybe a little more, I've been writing down questions that I still hear coming up. And I know a lot of them are myths, and I wanted to do a little research and get, some factual evidence backed up on this and just double check and make sure, I'm not just saying something's a myth and it's not a myth, and I want to make sure these have been proven. So what we're going to talk about tonight is a little bit about myths of the woods, as the title says. These are things that people are still saying, potentially still believing. Some of them a little benign, some of them potentially a little harmful. So I guess I would say this might be for more of a new bushcrafter or camper or somebody going into the woods, just so you don't get the wrong information. But I think there's going to be a little bit of good stuff come in there too, for people that are a little bit more experienced, because some of these questions have been asked to me by people that have been in the woods for like 20, 30 years. You know what I mean? And just, they'll get that passing, oh, have you heard? And I'll be like, yeah, I heard, but you don't believe that, right? And more often than not, I'm always surprised with the answer. Like, well, I always put some stock in it. Sometimes you get the, no, I know it's a myth. And then there's other people that are like, no, I've been doing this for years and I swear by it. So this is kind of where I'm coming from on this. And I know I kind of blindsided you on this a little bit, Ben. I did tell you it was coming into the works. I did send you some notes and stuff, but
yep.
This is kind of a pet project of mine. It's something I've been somewhat working on, but I know you're going to have a ton of good input on this because I've talked to you about 90% of what is on this list at some point in our ABA career here. And I know we've probably mentioned it in previous podcasts. There's 263 of them. Prior to this, I'm sure we've probably touched on the majority of these, but I thought it'd be nice to compile it all into one. Hopefully we get a few people pop into the chat here. I know we got the Drifting Spore there with us, and yeah, I know we're late, man. You get a couple of woods guys with technology. It's bound to happen. That's all I can say. But yeah, so why don't we jump right into it, Ben? And basically that list I sent you, I'm just going to work from the top and come on down. Let's talk about a myth. We'll talk about a little bit of our opinions on it. We're in the myth-based setup. Because most myths, as most people know, or some people know, is they're based on some sort of truth. You know what I mean? Or it established itself in some sort of truth. Or at the time, what was believed to be truth. And then these things get passed along and passed along and passed along, and research is done, and they don't necessarily change. Some people call them wise tales, myths, whatever you want. And I'm sure you've heard lots of them, Ben, yourself too, right?
Oh, yeah. I think I might have a couple we can talk about at the end. And there's a couple of things on some of the ones you have in there. I want to throw my 2 cents in, and I'm probably wrong, but I feel like I have something that I want to add to them.
Absolutely. And that's kind of where I wanted to go with this, because there's some myths where I know there's been studies done, and I know even from my standpoint, I'm not going to change what I do. Yeah. You know what I mean? Even though I've seen the study, I'm still going to be like, study or not, I'm going to hold strong on this one. And I bet you know the one I'm thinking of. Or you will anyway when we come up to it.
Yeah.
But, so anyway, like I said, let's just jump in feet first. First one I want to address is because this is the most recent one I have heard, and it's also the most frequent one I've heard. And I hope there's not a lot of people out there that still use this as a viable navigation method. And that's moss only grows on the north side of trees. And first of all, I want to throw out, that's based on depending on the hemisphere of the planet you're in, first and foremost. That is not universally globally recognized, even though it's used universally globally recognized. No matter where you go, you still hear this myth. And two, it's not really accurate. And I'm sure you know a little bit about this too, Ben. Like, would you ever go into the woods and be like, oh yeah, the moss is growing on this side of the tree. That's got to be north.
No. Moss does tend to grow a little bit better in shaded areas, and north side of trees tends to be shaded. That being said, I have seen moss 360 degrees around a tree, and I would not use that as a accurate indication of north and south. Shadows, sun position, stars, all would be much more accurate. Even if you understand a little bit of your landscape and you have a distance item, you can use that as a reference point for direction. But the way moss grows, probably going to get you lost. Yeah.
At least I wouldn't use it as my main navigation. And you hit all the points I want to touch on anyway. So the big thing is this started because moss does tend to grow on the shadier, damper, cooler sides of the tree. Northern hemisphere, it's your south, southeast, southwest sides that are getting the most sun, the most heat. Moss isn't going to grow there often. So the thought was the complete opposite side of that must be close to north. Which, yeah, okay, there's a little bit of truth based in this. If it's a tree standing out in the middle of a field with nothing else around affecting it. But like you said, there's a ton of things that come into this. Is it in a valley? Is it in a thick forest? Is it in different types of trees? Because that could affect how the moss grows. If there's a hardwood tree growing in with a bunch of softwood trees, that could add spores, things onto the bark, and you may get moss growing everywhere, like you said, 360 degrees. It is a neat thing that used to be said, and I mean, they even used to say this in kids' cartoons. And when I was doing my research on this, I did have a couple old kids' cartoons, and they were literally telling you on this. Like, one of them, I hate to use names, and I'm not going to use names. So one of these cartoons, literally, it was as early as the 90s, and then I was just like, okay, yeah, I'm done looking at this. They were like, yeah, follow the moss, it's the north side of the tree. And this is being told to kids, and this got passed along, and in the 80s, 70s, 60s, this was taken somewhat for granted. But yeah, it's totally debunked. I mean, feel free, folks, to jump on whatever search engine you like there, look this up. It's 100% debunked. So many factors go into that. Please don't use it as a viable navigation method.
And even if it were true, you would have a hard time getting an accurate direction off of it, because it's not like it's a thin line and that's clearly the north. It's still going to cover more than half of your stump, and you have to look at the surrounding environment. So yeah, could you use it as a navigation system? Most likely not. Definitely not reliable. Could you anecdotally find a tree where the north side has more moss than the rest of them? Absolutely. That could happen. That doesn't mean that it's consistent or reliable. So, yeah, definitely take that one with a grain of salt and a little bit more.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's not a bad thing to keep in your back pocket just as a conversation piece. No, there's more to it. And yeah, I have quite a few on this list, and you want to add some in, so I'm not going to take too much time on any one. So moving right along, this is one that kind of surprised me, and this is the one that, even so, I'm still not going to change my practices. And the myth is 40 to 45% of body heat is lost through the head. And you know what? I believed this for a long time. You know what I mean? But there was a study done in 2008, British Medical Journal. They did the study with people that were in their swimsuits, and they found out that heat is basically lost at the same rate all throughout your skin. And to follow this up, I've recently taken my medical first responder recertification just a couple weekends ago, and I asked this to the medical first responder instructor, and he 100% agreed with it. He said, yeah, a lot of people used to commonly believe this. We even used to teach people for hypothermia, get something warm around their head. And now it's more of a get them out of the wind, get them away from what's making them cold. It's not really going to make a major difference in getting that person's warmth back up. Now, that being said, am I still going to wear a hat when I'm sleeping in the coolness out in the winter? Of course, it's still more covering up. For me, I find if my ears stay warm, for whatever reason, psychologically or whatnot, I tend to stay a little bit more warm.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more science to this, but also keep in mind that oftentimes I think when they were saying this, you would see somebody who's wearing a decent jacket, good pants, good pair of boots, and maybe even gloves, and they're no hat, and they're saying they're freezing. And yes, your head out there, I mean, it houses your brain, you're breathing in and out, so that's where the coldest air enters your body, and then you're trying to expel. Your ears are covered with a lot of flesh, so they will get cold, and you can frostburn your ears rather quickly. They're very sensitive for things like that. So areas that oftentimes even get frostburned are your tips of your ears, the tips of your nose. And how can you protect that? Obviously, a hat definitely helps. Somebody with more hair will be warmer than somebody with no hair. So if you're bald-headed outside, yeah, definitely protect your head. It's more susceptible to sunburn and other issues. But yeah, covering your head definitely is important. But yeah, you're not losing half your body heat solely out of your head. Unless you're looking at it that you're well dressed everywhere else and that's the only exposed area, then yes, the heat you are losing probably is from your head because it isn't covered. But if you were to leave a whole arm exposed, now you're looking at a similar amount of skin, you would be equally getting cold from that. So covering all the areas of heat loss is important.
No, 100%. And I guess just a little bit of where the myth is rooted in on this, the best I could figure out is the thought process was your head has a lot of capillaries and veins and arteries and stuff like that going for blood flow to your brain. It's a major organ in your body. But the reality is, so does the rest of your body. You know what I mean? There's capillaries, veins, and arteries going through the majority of your body. Other places that people will tell you about is like the inside of your arms, the inside of your legs, groin area, all these sensitive areas. And you know what? We still use those ones to say if somebody is overheated, for instance, in heat stroke, heat exhaustion, heat stress, heat cramps, any of that. If you can get something cool on the inside of the arms, around the neck, carotid artery, inside of the legs, that is going to help cool them down a little bit, simply because, that's where a lot of these major veins and arteries and stuff come closest to the skin. Like you said, though, Ben, generally people have these covered up when they go outside. They're not just walking outside in a hat, T-shirt, and shorts and saying, I'm going to be good. It's the other way. They get all their clothes on, they generally forget their hat, and as you said, they're still freezing.
Yeah. So.
All right, so skipping right along on here. And this is one, it's kind of silly, but also good information. 2 can fit comfortably in a 2-person tent, or 3 can fit in a 3-person tent, or 4 can sleep in a 4-person tent. You know what? I hate the way that they market tents. When they say it's a 2-person tent, that really means if it was just you, one other person, no gear, you're laying very close together, head to feet, you can jam 2 people in there. And you may stay away from the sides of the tent. Most likely not. You're going to be up against them. So the general rule of thumb for this one is if you want a 3-person tent, buy a 4-person tent. If you're looking for a 4-person tent, buy a 5-person tent. The reality is none of us leave our gear outside. We want to take something inside, our shoes, our backpack, a change of clothes, snacks. We want something in there with us. You have to take that into account as a theoretical other person if you so want that. Me, I like to go 2 up. Yeah. From the size tent that I want. So if I want like a 2-person tent, I'm buying a 4-person tent. I like to keep all my stuff inside with me in case I want it, out of the weather, dry. You know what I mean?
100%. And that was kind of where I was going. You can get with the smaller tents, if it's 1 or 2 people, that 1 extra person is pretty well a minimum of what you need. As you start adding more people, you have a backpack. Look at a backpack. It's a half a height of somebody, and it's not necessarily going to stand up. So 4 backpacks easily take up the spot of 1 person. And then if you're trying to move around in there, if you have 4 backpacks in a 5-person tent, all of a sudden there is no room unless you're actually on the bed and you're very close confined. So if you plan on taking 4 people, I would recommend a minimum of a 6-person tent. And even then, that's going to be tight for a lot of situations. Depending on the trip, if it's possible, at that point you're even better off splitting it to multiple tents.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I am going to play devil's advocate on this a tiny bit and say I have gotten 5 people into a 3-person tent. Now it is very cozy, and there is no such thing as an individual sleeping bag. It's at a necessity, not comfort. We went out on a trip. There was 2 tents. One of them got damaged beyond being able to be used. We were young. We're like, screw it, everybody into this tent. Every bit of our gear was outside. We ended up taking 2 sleeping bags. One kind of went down under us. One kind of went over all of us. There was no room for anything else. You know what I mean? And that's reality what you're going to be looking at for something like that. So, but yeah, general rule of thumb, if you want a 3-person tent, buy one up. As you get more people in there, as Ben said, you can go up a little higher to make room for gear there. So let's see. Drifting Spore can confirm moss grows all the way around a tree. Absolutely. I have a 3-person tent. I find it good for just me. And this is what I'm talking about. My 3-person tent, that's my solo tent. Lots of room, but it would be tight quarters for 2 people with gear. So I don't mind it for like me, my dog, and my gear. You know what I mean? A 3-person tent, it seems to be just right. If it's me and Melissa, it's my wife. We don't mind being a little close. If it was Ben and I, that's going to get pretty cozy pretty fast. 1, we're each going to have a significant amount of gear. 2, we're fairly big fellas. You know what I mean? I'm upwards of 300 pounds. Ben's 6 foot. We're not tiny people.
Yeah,
but,
the 2 of us in a 3-person tent, it's, the jokes are going to be made. Spooning would be a word that would be said.
I'm going to leave that alone. Not going down that road.
But
this show could get a much higher rating if I wanted to chase that rabbit hole. Anywho, moving on. And this is a big one that I really want to talk about because I do get this one a lot, generally from the newer people going out into the woods. Biodegradable soap is okay to use in waterways. My answer to that is flip that bottle over and read the small print. You're mostly going to find out, even like the camp suds, the Coleman camp suds, a lot of other ones. They're all going to say to be away from waterways, and I have seen them, and in the research I have seen it mentioned up to digging a cat hole and basically burying the gray water. You know what I mean? And the reality is soap, by its nature, breaks the surface tension of water. So you get this into the even into the soil, into waterways, stuff like that. It breaks down the molecular structure of the way water works, and believe it or not, it can end up drowning fish. I know, as silly as that sounds, like especially with dish soap and things like that, like stuff that's straight up meant to cut through grease. It can end up drowning fish. It gets in their gills, and it makes them not be able to transfer air into their body the way it's supposed to, and the fish end up drowning. As silly as that sounds.
I got a Sea to Summit Wilderness Wash here. And it's interesting because it says biodegradable, pH neutral, concentrated all-purpose, low sudsing, suitable for fresh and salt water. So it'll work with all these things. It's body wash, shampoo, dishwasher, and clothes detergent. You can use it for everything. But if you get to the back, it will say, NB, please note, use at least 100 meters away from natural water sources.
Which is about 300 feet for our non-metric brethren there. But yeah, I mean, that's a long ways away. They don't want this stuff getting into waterways. So, and I get this all the time. I go out in the woods with people, even like my own family and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, look, so proud of themselves, and I hate to shoot them down from this. I even went and bought the special biodegradable soap specifically for camping. I'm going to hop in the river and have a bath. And I'm like, no, you can't do that. And then we get into this whole talk, and this is still one that's very vastly believed. If you get the biodegradable soap or the camping soap, you can use it wherever you want. It's fine for the environment. Not the case, folks. Read the small print. I mean, I know there's lots of people out there that are probably experienced woods people that still have this stuff in their pack, and they're like, I still wash my hands in the river with it. It's not good. Not going to say don't do it because live your life. But it is harmful. It is not perfectly safe.
Yeah, it's 100% true. And honestly, there's plenty of times I've been out there, you can't get 300 feet from water sources. You know?
Yeah. No, I mean, here in Nova Scotia, good luck.
Right? There's a lot of times I've been in an area where if you walk 300 feet in any direction, you're hitting a river, a lake or a pond or wetlands. And so what you're finding is oftentimes like islands of treed area, and that's where you're camping in. It's like almost an island of forest surrounded by wetland of some form, and that island is probably not going to be 600 feet in any one particular direction, let alone all directions. So if you're on a small island or a small, you're not going to get that far from water source. And so you have to do your absolute best. And one of the things is to minimize the use of soap as much as you can.
And that's the thing. I tend to use just plain water. Scrub everything out with plain water. And then I do a real good wash when I take everything home. You know what I mean? In the woods, unless something's really, really bad, I'm dealing with raw meat, stuff like that, I tend to try and leave the soap away. Even when I'm cleaning myself and stuff like that, I tend to take a face cloth. And I mean, depending on how long I'm out there, I'm not going to lie, sometimes I get those one wipe shower things, and I have gone as far as to have a bath. I'm not going to lie. Yeah. But generally, for like the leave no trace and stuff like that, a bit of a charcoal cleans you up really nice. And this sounds counterproductive, but you get your body moist, dampen it down from the river, whatever, and then just scrub yourself with some charcoal. Sounds counterproductive because you're literally spraying charcoal on your body, but it actually acts as like an exfoliator. And then when you rinse it off, it pulls a lot of the dirt and grime, bad smells, and dead skin off your body. Now, not everybody's going to do that. Absolutely understandable. That's not everybody's thing. Point of the matter is, though, just don't believe that it's 100% eco-friendly. In rivers, like I said, kills fish, fish eggs. If you're just doing it in a swampy area, there's a lot of biodiversity in there. Little microorganisms and bacteria and stuff that are helping break and decompose the stuff that's in the soil. And this stuff will just come in and kill it. And you can change the biodiversity of an area that way. I mean, sure. Small scale, probably not so much, but over time, everything's a cumulative effect, right?
Yeah, and you really do have that issue because especially in popular camping areas, if you got hundreds of people coming through in a year, 2-3 times a week, doesn't take long to get 100 or more people through an area. If everyone drops just a couple of drops of a biodegradable, then you're going to have an effect on that area, right? And I understand the counter argument. If you're cooking, you have like a bit of grease, a bit of butter, a bit of oil on any of your dishes, that film will build up. And if you don't clean it up, by the end of a week or two, you'll come back and it'll literally be fuzzy. No matter how much clean water and sand you use to clean it, it's just not getting that oily residue off, and it'll grow a mold. So you hit it dead on. Clean it as absolute good as you can. Use a bit of boiling water. That'll help get a lot of it off. And when you get home, then use the soap at your house to make sure everything is finally clean before you put it away. And it makes a huge difference.
Exactly. And in a pinch, if you're going out there, long haul, you're going for a marathon trek or whatever, campaign camping, multi-days, you may have to figure out how to actually do your dishes and stuff in the woods. And most of these bottles, if you dig into their websites and stuff, they will have the proper practices to do it. So I'll let you folks do your own research on that. Next up on the list here, this is another one I get a lot, is aluminum cans. And, I'll just burn them in the fire while I'm in there. Yes, you can get a fire going hot enough to burn aluminum cans, but generally not before you're vaporizing a lot of that aluminum and ink and outside labels and crap like that, potentially breathing it in, causing your own health risks. And if you stay to a small and reasonable campfire, you're probably not going to get it that hot. You're going to end up just burning all the outside crap off and in the morning picking up your cans. You know what I mean? I think aluminum, and it's in my notes there, but I don't have them in front of me. It's like 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeah. You're more into metallurgy than I am. You would know that.
Yeah, that's what you got wrote
right? Okay. I mean, what's the average campfire? Maybe around 900 degrees, unless you're getting into, like big-ass fires or something like that. 900, 1,000 degrees. You're not going to get up to that level without these massive fires. Hopefully, we're being careful enough that we're not making fires that big, honoring the no trace left behind. Your fire, better off just to crush those suckers down flat, throw them back in your pack them out with you. You know what I mean? Shouldn't leave anything in there. Not to mention, if you did burn and melt them, all that crap's going into the ground under your fire pit.
So according to this, between 800 and 1200 C. So at the top end, it is hot enough to melt your aluminum. And that's what's really happening. I mean, there's not a ton of metal in aluminum can, to be honest with you. If you melt one down, you'll see that it actually doesn't have that much metal in it, and that's why it doesn't weigh that much when you're taking it in or out. Aluminum, for anyone who doesn't know, has the same density as granite. So granite actually weighs the same as aluminum. We think of aluminum as light, and it is comparatively to other steels or metals. That being said, it's still not light, but it's strong when it's thin. We're able to make it pretty thin and pretty small and still have the strength. So aluminum is strong by weight. And that's cool. I have seen cans disappear in a fire, and what happens is it's generally melting and getting into the ash. If somebody comes and stirs it later, what you will find is there's little balls of aluminum in the fire pit. And so then it's just sort of left there. It's not great. It's not meant to be there. Carry your garbage out. It's not that much. You were able to bring it in, and you took.
If you can bring it in, you can take it back out. Chances are it's a lot lighter going back out.
You took the contents out, which weighed more than what's remaining, and you can crush the cans up. Like, I know some recycling places don't like to see them crushed, but who cares about that if you're trying to get it out? So if you carry 3 cans in, you crush them up. They're still taking up less room than the original 1 can. So it doesn't take much. Put it on the ground, hit it with your heel. It will go down fairly flat, just off the body weight of an average human. I know I've never had trouble crushing one. I don't think Robert has, but maybe you're really small.
No, pretty sure I'm good on that one.
And can't do it, but generally, yeah, we can crush a tin can and bring it out. And then other cans. I've seen people trying to do it with cans of beans, soup cans. Those have a lot of steel in them. They take much, much longer to get rid of. And what you'll find is, if it doesn't burn out, and yeah, you'll get the paper off of it, and you'll take some of the protective layers off of it, but rusty cans will stay in the woods for many, many years before they
long time. You're creating your own hazards.
Yeah. If fellow campers come by and get cut with it, they could very well end up with diseases and issues. It's really not good. So you pack in, pack out. It's not that big of a deal. It's a type of laziness. Let's not be foolish with that. And I think there's nobody who's ever gone in and not found beer cans, food cans,
usually in the fire pit, because people they can burn them up, and then they realize, oh, they're still here. Guess I'll just leave them there.
And I've also seen Tim Hortons, Subways, McDonald's paper cups and the plastic lids and the straws, plastic and paper, and they last there for a long time, and it's just a state. It doesn't look good. And then what you're really doing is making somebody else who comes in clean up after your mess, which is not a pleasant experience. I don't want to pick up that. I don't know how long it's been there. I don't know what's been done to it. I don't know if somebody is pissed all over it. You know what I mean? It's disgusting.
You never know.
Right? So if you're in there and you carried it in, please carry it out. And honestly, if you can, put it into a reusable container. Oftentimes what I will do is when I go camping and I'm taking stuff, I will move it to more of a reusable container that I don't mind bringing in and out. So if you're taking, say, a few drinks in, take a flask, little metal flask, throw your few drinks in there, have your good time. Then when you take it out, you don't mind taking that flask. That's your flask. You spent a bit of money on it.
Not to mention that flask now has memories attached to it.
Yeah. So things like that. For foods, reusable containers, much better than... So I've been known to take 4 or 5 eggs in a little mason jar. Then I don't have...
First time we went camping and I'm sitting there eating my gruel and you're eating like a king.
Yeah. But then I'm not worried about the shells. And I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, and you'll talk a bit about that in the future, but all the extra stuff you have to take in, you still have to deal with it. So anything you can minimize and reuse, like that reusable container. Now if you don't finish all your food from the day before, if you clean that jar out good enough, you can now put that new food, if you heat up a dehydrated meal, you now have a container to put what you didn't eat, and you can reheat it the next day or whatever.
All right. Next up on here, and the most controversial one on my list by far, and I know both you and I are going to have words on this one, Ben. There has been a study done. Delicious backcountry meals are actually delicious. It is a myth, apparently, according to these studies. Apparently, it is hunger and the desire for food that is the best sauce of all. Basically, you're going in, you're working, you're burning calories, either getting in there, setting up your tent, whatever. Your body's starting to crave these essential carbs and sugars and other, starches and crap like that because it wants to recoup some of these calories. Therefore, fooling your brain into thinking that meals taste better than they actually do. So the study they did was they literally took people out into the woods, they did their camping. Oh yeah, these meals are awesome. Drugged them back home, made the same meals in their backyard on a campfire, and they're like, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it has to do with being in the woods and the whole camping experience. Personally, for me, is it potentially psychological? Who cares? I still think a steak cooked on an open fire, even the coals like you and I did, Ben, tastes better than any steak I can cook on the stove.
Well, we've always talked about that. We said meals do taste better in the woods, so I think there's truth to that part of it. But yeah, a lot of these meals that are pre-cooked, pre-dehydrated, especially the store-bought ones, and I think we may talk about this next week. But yeah, these are truly a thing. I mean, I used to eat the MREs with the military, and generally they're pretty bland and boring. It wasn't until we brought.
Nope, you finish your thought, and I'll come back.
It wasn't until we started bringing spices and stuff in to add a little bit of flavor that we found that they were acceptable. But I never seen a single military guy ever say, "Oh, I got MREs. I'm not going to go down to the cafeteria and get the fresh cooked meal that they just made for me." No, doesn't happen. Not a real thing. And if somebody said we could go out for a restaurant or we could eat MREs in house, no, it doesn't happen. It's not a thing, right? So.
There's a reason they call them rations. You know what I mean? But funny story on this one. Once again, when I was a younger fella out in the woods doing brush, we got a hold of a couple of these MREs, and it was kind of my first experience with them. And I ate them out in the woods, and I thought they were the most amazing thing ever. They tasted great. I can't believe they can get food like this into a package that lasts so long, and I can take it into the woods, and it's delicious. Fast forward a week later to when I was home and I had everything else. I'm like, I'm going to try one of them MREs. They were so good. Yeah, wasn't that great?
No.
Once I got home and the whole novelty of being in the woods and the novelty of the MRE and everything else wore off, just like you said, Ben, it was bland as hell, man. It had very little taste. I think it was a Salisbury steak of all things.
Yeah. I think my favorite of them was always the beans and wieners. That one was actually, in my opinion, decent. But even then, a bit of salt and pepper did a lot to improve that particular meal. And if you could have like a decent toast and some cheese whiz on it, that's my favorite topping on toast. Or a hard cheese melted down, that's really good too. That makes a huge difference to those meals. Those little add-ons definitely help. The other thing I find with those is it's a bit of the romance of it, especially as young adults. And this is what the military eats. It feels kind of cool. As you grow a bit older, the romance in that gets a little bit stale.
Oh, this is what the military eats. Those poor souls.
So take it with some general knowledge.
Take it with a grain of salt.
Definitely.
Pun fully intended.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie, I was definitely down to Mech recently, and I looked at 4 or 5 of the options they have, and there's now a lot of companies making. It used to be like Mountain House was the best option you could find, but now I'm seeing there's a whole bunch of options, and some of them actually do look kind of appealing. But we'll talk about that in the future. But yeah, definitely I kind of agree. It's more the experience and the hunger you have and looking forward to actually getting something in your stomach that makes it feel much better than it really is.
Absolutely. So a couple of the comments from here. Red Bear, don't question why, just go with it.
Yeah.
That's the best advice right there. Drifting Spore, I think it's a smell thing. The fresh air you're breathing makes the food taste better. And you know what? Like I said, or as we were saying here, it's an experience thing. There is a romance to it when you're out there in the woods, the whole setting, the fresh air, as you said, the campfire, preparing your own food in a primitive way, even though most of us carry pots and pans and stuff like that. Like Ben said, there's a romance to it. And I think it all triggers a bunch of other chemical releases in your brain that kind of gives you the illusion that stuff tastes better than it is. I'm still going to be one of those avid people that say food tastes better in the woods. Be it the entire experience or the food itself, I still like it better in the woods. And Red Bear, I've been in work camps that MREs would be way better than what they serve. I've been in a couple logging camps and cook camps. Had some real good food, had some real bad food. Yeah. So I know what you mean there, man.
Yeah, the next one I think is an interesting one you have here. I'll let you introduce it, but...
Yeah, and you know what? When somebody told this to me, I looked at them like they had three heads because I couldn't understand the basis of it, and then I had to do a little research on it and figure out where it came from. And the myth is sleeping naked in a sleeping bag keeps you warmer. So here's where the myth came from and what the problem is with it. A lot of times when people are going, and once again, this is my own research, folks, when people were crawling into their sleeping bags, they failed to change into some sort of clean, dry base layer to get into their sleeping bags. They're crawling into their sleeping bags with the clothes that they've been wearing for the day, or they strip down to their underwear, or whatever. Anyway, the clothes are dirty. They're full of your own body oils and sweat and potentially dampness because whatever. And then night comes and you're not completely dry and you get a chill. And then people would peel all the stuff off. They'd get in there, they'd be dry and think, oh, I'm warmer. It's not that you're warmer, it's that you don't have that layer of humidity and stuff trapped in your clothes, sucking your heat away. It's the same reason they tell you not to breathe into your sleeping bag when you're asleep. That moisture is going to go in, it's going to collect, it's going to leach heat away. That's why we use water when we're fighting fires. It is a great absorber of heat. Thoughts, Ben?
So there is kind of a bit of a counter logic to this one, and it's important to think about it. And it comes down to, and I'm going to throw this out, and I think you're going to know exactly where I'm going with this: gloves versus mitts.
Yes.
Right? If you put on a pair of mitts, they're generally warmer than a pair of gloves. And that's because your fingers can touch each other. They're transferring heat to each other. Where you have the gloves, you have a much bigger surface area, and so you have more area to lose heat from that glove. Plus, it keeps your fingers individual, and they can't kind of cross heat. Sort of a similar idea. If you take two people and put in one sleeping bag, it is significantly warmer than just by yourself because you're sharing that heat. You're both producing a bit of heat, and you have a less surface area around you, so it's more efficient. The thought is when you get in naked, your legs can touch each other, your toes can kind of touch your other feet, and so you don't have anything that's kind of isolated in just the sleeping bag heating you. That being said, I agree that if you're wearing a thermal, I mean, think about it. If you were to walk around outside in a thermal and then walk around naked, where are you going to get colder? Naked, right? More
and
insulation.
Notice when I first said this, I said a good thermal base layer.
Yeah. More insulation is more insulation. And that was something I heard a few years back when a guy was talking about it. And one guy said what he does is oftentimes when he sleeps, he'll put on extra clothes before he goes to bed because more insulation is more insulation. And this was an ultralight guy. And he said he'll go with a minimum sleeping bag. So if it says it's good for -10, he's going with a -10 sleeping bag, which we've talked before. -10 sleeping bag is almost survival at -10. But what he'll do is then supplement that with extra insulation and maybe even throw his coat or an extra blanket over the top that he uses for something else. And by adding these up, he's gaining that extra advantage. But overall, it's all gear he was going to take anyways. So if there's a way to sort of make things work in multiple ways, he'll do that. So a good jacket that you can throw over the whole thing and prevent that loss definitely helps.
No, 100%. And like I said, folks, well, actually, I'm just going to leave it there. If you want to do a little research on it, there is tons of information on the internet about it. Like I said, key is to be clean, dry, and have a good thermal layer, or you're not putting on any kind of dampish clothes, as Ben was saying there.
The only other thing is with your sleeping bag, try not to do anything that will reduce the loft. So I mentioned throwing something over the top. If you're putting something heavy on top of your sleeping bag, any loft you take off is probably not being made up by the thing you throw over the top. So there's ways to do it, and it takes a bit of knowledge and experience to figure it out, but we'll kind of leave it at that for now.
Yep. Now this next one that's on the list, I still hear this one, and I'm not going to lie. This tends to be in the more country settings. I will hear this one. During the medical first responder course, there was still somebody there that adamantly believed this. There's a touch of truth behind it, but it's also a dangerous truth. And there was, everybody remembers seeing the cartoons with the big St. Bernard, the little cask of what was usually whiskey on their neck with the little red symbol on it. And the idea was this dog would go out, find people, they could have a little snoot of the old, good stuff, and it would warm them up. And the myth is alcohol warms you. First and foremost, let me put that to bed. It does not warm you. It gives the illusion of warming you, and in a survival situation or a cold situation, this can actually be fatal. I'm sure you know, Ben, as a search and rescue person, and myself as a first responder, I have gone and found people that were on the verge of freezing to death, drinking alcohol, thinking that it would warm them up.
So the myth from this definitely comes from the fact that if you take a swig of alcohol, you immediately feel a warm feeling going down your stomach, and you're like, oh, that warmed me up, that took the chill out, and you feel like the chill is going out, but alcohol does thin the blood and helps you dissipate heat quicker, which is obviously not what you're trying to do. So in the long run, you're definitely losing the heat.
Yep. And once again, some people will be like, oh, I get so hot when I drink and stuff like that. And just to add on to what Ben was saying there, it does thin the blood. It dilates blood vessels. So the blood vessels on your hands and stuff, they expand, more blood flow goes through. You do get a rush of what feels like warmth. It's all the core temperature coming from inside you, coming to the extremities. It gives you the illusion of being warm. Once it gets to the extremities, through those dilated blood vessels and arteries and veins and yada, 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 it's now outside in a giant heat sink. That heat dissipates. You're now taking that colder blood, pulling it back into your core, and now you're going to have an after drop. It's going to plummet your body temperature.
Yeah. What does help, though, is taking in a few calories. Any calories you're bringing in, you can help burn. And a full stomach, believe it or not, working to digest that food produces heat. So before you go to bed, for instance, if you eat a decent meal and you get into bed, you're going to feel warmer because your body's producing that heat. Another thing that some people do is a quick workout. Do some jumping jacks, do some push-ups, do some running on the spot, and then get into bed. Your body heat will be built up. You get in your sleeping bag, you'll heat that sleeping bag up, and you'll feel warmer throughout the night.
Yep. And the other thing, and this is another myth I haven't gotten around. I don't know if it's a myth. It could be fine. I think it's fine. Empty your bladder before getting in, because even having that extra fluid in your body takes extra calories to keep it at body temperature. Yeah. So if you can expel that waste, all waste, by the way, folks, it's just that much less that has to be heated up inside you.
Yeah. And the other thing is, if you have a half full bladder or whatever, when you get into bed, the likelihood you have to get up in the middle of the night to deal with that means you're going to get out, you're going to cool yourself down, and then you have to get back in. You've cooled your sleeping system down, and you have to restart. So that's going to take some more energy, which maybe you at that time don't have to expend. So prepping before you go to bed definitely helps.
Just jumping back to the comments here, Red Bear Tactical joining us. I like how Snugpack has a comfort rating and an extreme rating on their sleeping bag. So jumping back to the sleeping bag and stuff things, yeah, don't look at what the face value is on your sleeping bag. Most of them are going to have 3 ratings. One is going to be the comfort rating, then you'll have the extreme rating, then you'll generally have the survival rating. And most sleeping bags that you're going to find at big box marts and things like that, they're going to display the survival rating, and that's what you're going to be buying is based on a survival rating. Survival means you're not going to die, but you are not going to be comfortable.
Yeah.
You are far better off to do a little more research online and stuff like that and buy something based on the comfort rating. That means at that temperature, you are still going to be comfortable. Now, with a lot of this stuff, you can augment it with like sleeping bag liners or stacking up or snug pack, which he was talking about here, and underquilts and stuff like that. You can augment them. But never go by the survival rating, because it's going to leave a bad taste in your mouth the first time you take your -5 sleeping bag out at 0 degrees and you're like, I shivered all night, but my bag is good for -5. The chances are the comfort is +7.
Yeah.
So just, that's a whole other topic that I think we talked about in the past anyway, so I'll leave it at that.
We definitely suffered
moving
there.
on. What's that?
We've suffered that.
Yeah, no, we did. And we've talked about that story before, and I think that's where the previous podcast came from. Anywho, this is one we preach, and I know you probably have a little bit of an opinion on this one, Ben, because I know I've heard you say it a lot too. The myth is it is okay to throw organic waste on the ground. And let me back up. You're not the one saying to throw your waste on the ground. You're an advocate for taking it out with you, is what I should say, before people get the wrong idea.
Yeah, so, and actually there was a really good article a little while ago. I don't know if we could find it quickly and put it up someday on a site or something. But there was an article that talked about it, and the example they had was like orange peels. So orange peels here, say in Canada, they're not natural. Banana peels, not natural. So when it comes in, it can affect the wildlife there, because it's not something they're meant to eat. It's not something that they're sort of designed or know how to do. And it can actually have a negative effect on the local environment, and can take a significantly longer time to get rid of. So you're like, oh, it's biodegradable. It'll get rid of itself. Yes, kind of, but maybe to a detrimental effect that you really can't see. And we started that just today, even. Like I mentioned, if you're taking eggs in, if you put them in a jar, and yes, you're losing that natural protection, because the fresh eggs we've talked about in the past are good for like a month. But once you take them out of the shell, they'll go quicker, bad. That being said, eggshells or something, it's going to attract wildlife. It's going to change their habits, right? And that's
the thing. Oh, sorry. Just before you continue on, Ben, I want to touch on that. The big thing that I can think of is if you're leaving all your organic waste around, once you leave and animals move in, they may now start associating humans with food. And this is where you get into a lot of the problematic wildlife problems, like black bears approaching people, coyotes approaching people, things like that. Is it because you threw your apple core over your shoulder? Maybe not you specifically, but maybe somebody left their old dirty meat packages in the wood, or an abundance of food. They're like, oh, we took too many, but I don't want to carry this crap out, kind of deal. It does add up over time.
Yeah. And if you leave food around a campsite and animals start to associate that campsite with a source of free food, every time people go there, they're kind of coming around, because they know when people show up, food tends to show up. And now you have people complaining that animals are getting into their packs, they're causing damage, they've damaged gear. I've heard people complain that they had things in like coolers and the coolers got chewed up. It's because those animals had reason to believe that there was food there for them, and if you dissuade that by not providing them food and protecting your food better, then those encounters become infrequent, if not non-existent.
And another example you've used in the past, Ben, that I liked, and I'm going to bring it back up, and I was hoping you would, but I'm going to lead you into it, and then maybe you can take over, is the old apple seed. You eat an apple core, you fire it out. This apple seed now goes into a woods area that's never had apple trees before. Maybe it, starts to sprout. Now there's an apple tree in an area where there was never apple trees. Maybe it's an apple tree that's not indigenous to that area. You never know how that's going to affect something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's very true. And if you go to like Nova Scotia, for instance, it's really bad for it, where there was apple orchards grown for so many places. I've been in the backwoods in not far from you, and we found a viable apple tree right growing in the middle of nowhere, and it was an edible apple, which a lot of people don't understand. That apples don't grow the way you expect them to do. Just because you plant a Macintosh seed doesn't mean you get a Macintosh apple. Did you know that?
Yeah, because they're going to cross-pollinate to be able to produce fruit.
Yeah. So when it cross-pollinates, you end up with a totally different apple. It's just the apple. The original tree grows at Macintosh, but what grows out of it isn't a Macintosh. It's a Macintosh and something else. Well, if you drop a new apple type in that woods, then whatever apples trees may even be in the area can be negatively affected. Similar to other things we bring in, an example, because I've heard of it, and it's probably much rarer, but I've heard people say that they've seen weed, marijuana grow from homegrown marijuana plants. So there somehow a viable seed was found in it, and it grew out of it, which shouldn't happen because they're not supposed to be pollinated to be useful. I know this is not a weed channel, but
no.
Be careful.
But I have an example based on weed too, because it's from where I'm from.
Yeah. But anything you bring in can affect the environment. So yeah, try not to leave biodegradable foods in the woods. It causes multiple issues and can definitely have a negative effect on the environment.
100%. And the last one I have on my list here, more for our lady counterparts. Hopefully this doesn't make anyone uncomfortable, but it is something I hear a lot, and it deters people from going camping. Any ladies out there going through their menstruation cycle increases the likelihood for bear attacks or predator attacks or stuff like that. And I hear it so many times. Oh, I can't go camping because it's, my time of the month or whatever, blah, 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 blah. There's been studies done. It has been proven there is no significant increase in any kind of wildlife attack or the probability of wildlife attacks. Maybe a little bit more of a discomfort for the person there, and that's whatever, that's there to do, you know what I mean? If they don't want to do that there, that's perfectly fine. Not judging on that, but just simply on the mere fact that a little extra blood is going to increase bear attacks. It's no way. There's been so many studies done in it. Actually, funny enough, what drugged this up and why I got added to the list was Melissa and I were watching Naked and Afraid. And there was, I think it was teams. There was 2 ladies and 2 guys. They were in Africa. They had to separate and come together. And one of the ladies, her cycle came a little early. And we're talking like the African savannah here, where they were only 100, maybe 200 feet from crocodiles and lions and other things. She survived. Nothing came in and tried to eat them. That's all I can say. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I do want to throw something on there, just because it does get brought up. It gets brought up with shark attacks. It gets brought up with different wild animals. It's no different than anything else, though. Personal hygiene is extremely important in the woods. We've talked about it before. So any way you can keep yourself clean and any garbage. So there are methods, and we are not the people. I mean, we know of the methods. We're not the people to propose these because we don't have to deal with the issues. But if you're going to go to the woods,
if you folks are interested in this stuff, by all means, reach out to us. We will drag our wives on. They would be much better suited to give this information.
Yeah, I mean. Interestingly enough, and I will throw this out, and it doesn't. We're not claiming to be experts. We are surrounded by women. Me and Robert are both in homes where we are the only male, and we'll use that term loosely, only masculine influence in the house.
I even lost my dog, man. I don't even have another dog to help back me up.
So we do have some experience in that, and there are things that you can do. But across the board, what I will say is, like, we talk about the cat holes and stuff, and getting it away from your camp. So if you're going to use the washroom, or you're going to even clean yourself up, you talk about your one wipes, and you can possibly burn your one wipes. But again, that's a biodegradable substance, and some people, I can leave it around. But those bamboo wipes, and I love taking them, they don't break down after a day or a week or a month.
They take tons of time.
Yeah. And so if you bury them, they're still going to be there for quite a while. They're not going to break down underground. You can try to burn them, but even then, it does take a decent fire to get them to disappear.
Oh, absolutely. Ask any plumber if you should flush flushable wipes, like baby wipes, wet wipes, whatever. They will start yelling at you. Yeah. That you absolutely do not, because just because they advertise that it's flushable does not make it flushable. They destroy septic systems. all because they don't break down the way they're supposed to.
Even toilet paper itself does not break down as quickly or as easily as you expect it to. And if you doubt that, go take a pile, put it in the middle of your lawn, and then pour water over it and come back a couple of weeks later, and you'll still find quite a bit of remnants to it. It won't disappear. Not easily, not readily. So digging that hole, burying what you need to, and taking out what you can definitely is the best method. Obviously, some of that is not possible to do in a hygienic manner. So take that into account and do everything you can to stay as clean, because it's important for you to stay clean and prevent things like infections, soreness, and just general discomfort. But yeah, look into the methods to really help yourself make yourself as comfortable. And that works for regardless of how you identify or where you are in your life.
Absolutely.
Keeping yourself clean and dealing with your personal hygiene is extremely important. And longer trips, it does get difficult if you're not keeping an eye on it the whole time. So definitely something to think about.
Now I know you said you had a couple you wanted to throw in here, Ben. So let's go to your list. What you got?
I did, and I kind of forgot. I think we've hit a couple of them. Sort of aside, though. Yeah, let's.
Are you blanking?
I'm blanking. That's what's going on now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's all right. It's all good. Not going to put you on the spot. I mean, we are at 56 minutes. We have come up to our hour. I mean, we covered a lot of stuff there. And like I said, some of them were kind of silly. Some of them were plain dangerous. What about you folks out there? What myths have you heard that you may question? What old wives' tales and stuff like that have you heard that you still hold true to today? Not that we judge, don't get me wrong. Like I said, I'm just putting the information out there that we have found from our own research, and some studies and stuff like that have been done, but you folks do what you want with it. You know what I mean? All we can do is offer you the information, and it's up to you folks to process it. So once again, anything you folks have that you want to give to us, no judgment. You know what I mean? We're not experts. We learn as we go, and we just share the information we find, and we hope you folks do the same to us.
I do have one.
Go for
it. This is a myth, and I'm a firm believer that this is a true myth. But a lot of people, if I get wet or if I get cold, I'm going to get sick. Right?
Yeah, there's been this past link in cold weather, getting cold, all of that, and getting sick. Yeah. I know where you're going with this. Go for it, Ben.
So there's a couple of things I do want to point out with this. You get sick because you're exposed to a virus or a bacteria or some kind of germ, and that's what gets you sick. Generally out in the woods, you're isolated from this stuff. That's not the likelihood. But what can happen is in times of stress, your immune system can be weakened, and you're more likely to get sick in those situations. But we tend to get sick more when we get cold, because in cold weather, we tend to go indoors and spend time with people in closed areas where it's easier for these germs and viruses to transfer from one to another. So it's a common myth, and people, I can't go camping or can't do this because it's too cold, I'll get sick. You're probably not going to get sick, not because you went out in the cold or because you got rained on. You're getting sick because you got exposed to disease. And
that's the thing. Most people get sick once they get home. They don't get sick in the woods, but they come home and they're like, it was cold all weekend, and then they get sick. It's because the stress, as Ben said, on your body lowered your immune system a little. You're probably going with a little less sleep. We all know that some of us sleep way better in the woods. But, if you're not used to it, you can not sleep as well, and other stresses, just the extra exertion you're putting out. You weaken your body a little, and then you come home, you get back inside, you may get around somebody that has the virus on them, but it may not be affecting them, such as a cold or something like that, because you can be a carrier and not display symptoms, as we have learned with this past COVID crap, you know what I mean? And that goes with all viruses and viruses and bacteria and things like that. You don't necessarily have to display symptoms. You get against somebody, your body picks it up, your immune system's now lower because of the additional stresses, and now you become sick.
And how about this one? Water is safe to drink if it's passed over 7 stones.
Okay, you're going to have to walk me through this one.
So it used to be years ago. You often hear, "Oh, if it's running water, it's safe to drink. If it's spring
And I
water,
had
it's
that
safe."
one on my list, but I thought that one's been debunked enough now. So what's this about 7 stones?
So this was one I heard growing up a fair bit, and it was basically if it's moving over, if it's passing over at least 7 stones, then it's not picking up gravel. It cleared a lot of that out, I guess. But there's a theory that it would, and that's not true. It depending on what's above stream. And the example that was given to me years ago is you could walk half a kilometer up the stream and see absolutely nothing wrong and say, okay, it's safe to drink. But a half a kilometer and 10 more feet, there could have been a dead moose or dead animal sitting in there. And, that rotting and decaying meat is leaching into the water and could be, causing a spike in the bacterias in the water, and that can make you extremely ill. You also don't know if there's farms or sewage of some type or what's been running into that water. And believe it or not, there's an acceptable amount of sewage for water that you can still drink. There's a acceptable amount of chemicals and everything else. So few people are drinking pure, clean water. In fact, pure, clean water is also not safe. Like certain amount of minerals and stuff is necessary. Completely distilled water leaches minerals out of your body. But that being said, it is really important to boil and filter water whenever possible.
No, 100%. And like you said, you never know what's upstream. I mean, a lot of these little offshoots coming into the river, they could be coming from ponds and lakes that have beaver dams in them. And I mean, Giardia, Streptococcus, things like that. They're big ones that come from water. There's a lot of parasites that can be carried in water. I mean, around here anyway, I do know there's some people in I'm trying to think, Norway and a lot of places like that where most of their water is coming off glaciers and stuff like that. They'll be in the woods and say, oh, it's perfectly acceptable to drink. I would probably still boil the water. You know what I mean? For the sake of a couple minutes and boiling it up, it's not worth the stomach problems that can bring on to you.
Definitely not.
Especially if you're going to be in the woods for any amount of time. Even having the runs in the woods is just completely uncomfortable and leads to more dehydration.
Yeah. So definitely something to consider, something to keep in mind. Clean drinking water is infinitely important. So don't listen to these various things where people say, oh, you can do this or that. There are different filtration systems you can set up in the woods. Some of them work very well. Do your research before you set them up. We have always recommended buying a good industry tested filtration system and use that for sure.
You got anything else for us, Ben?
Those are the top two I had thought of earlier. They came back to me.
Yeah, I've never heard that 7 stones one, but I get what it means now.
Yeah.
When you first said it kind of threw me right off. I'm like, what do you mean? Do I got to go get 7 rocks and just run the water over it? But I get where you're coming from right now. But yeah, so once again, folks, I think once again we're over our hour. Probably a good spot to end it here for tonight, Ben.
Yeah.
Okay, folks, so we do have a plan for next week. And what's that going to be, Ben?
We are going to talk about camp food and different options.
So if you're going to be joining us next week, be sure to hop back on. Maybe you'll learn a few meal ideas to get you out there in the woods and have a good time. But for me tonight, you folks have a good night.
Night all.
I ended the stream on my end.
Oh, I have to.